Hello, and welcome to Improbable Things. I'm J. Grace Pennington, and this is my podcast where I share 6 improbable thoughts before breakfast, which means 6 thoughts about reading, writing, or just storytelling in general. So I have my 6 things, and I am ready to get started for this week. So actually, you might have noticed, or you might have not. If you're like me, you may not even always know exactly which day of the week it currently is, but I do normally do this on Thursdays. And last Thursday, I just really did not want to, and so I didn't. I was so tired last week. But I'm actually going to be out of town this Thursday, so I didn't want to go that long without getting an episode out. So here I am on a Monday, and had to just try to get 6 things together because I forgot that I was doing it on Monday, but I think I've got some good content for you all, so I'll dive into that now. So number 1, I have been able to continue staying on track with my word count for Firmament Progenitor, but I did reach that point in the story, which it doesn't happen with every book, but it happens more than not, where I get maybe about halfway through, maybe a little more, and suddenly realize this is getting pretty boring. And I realized that the rest of the content that I have in my outline is actually not going to fill out the rest of the story all that well. And in this case, up to that point, the story had been really going pretty well. Like the writing had been pretty smooth. I'd been finding it interesting. And then I suddenly just started hitting this place where it was kind of boring. And I just wasn't really seeing the stakes, that high for the rest of the book. Like it just wasn't. I could see it wasn't gonna cut it, so I had to go back and re-outline the last few chapters, which again often happens, and I was able to get really excited about some of my new ideas for the rest of the book, and I think this is going to be a really good one. Like I went into it only with the core of the idea, and it's expanded into an actual story really well, I think, and yeah, I think it's gonna be a really good one. I think that people that like the Firmament series are going to enjoy it. So number 2, I mentioned last time that I had been able to find a place to do some more recording, and that I recorded about half of a Christian romance book for a friend and colleague, and so I was able finally last night to record the rest of it. And I've said multiple times that romance really is not my thing. I don't read or watch romance stories, hardly ever. Very rarely do I enjoy them, but I really enjoy, this author's name is Angela Castillo, and everything I've done for her in the romance category has just been really sweet. And I actually teared up at the end of this one, so it's a really short and sweet read. So keep an eye out for the audiobook of Love and Craft Fairs by Angela Castillo coming out soon. Or if you would rather read rather actually read it, with your eyes, you can get an ebook of it instead. But it was really sweet. I enjoyed it. So number 3, I may have mentioned a while back, I have a Kindle Vella project going called Should I Finish It? And basically that was just a way to use existing content that I probably would never have another way to use, which is all of my unfinished stories, because I have so many of them. I've been writing so long, and until the last decade or so, I never finished anything. And even since then, there's been plenty of things that I started that just fizzled out. And so, honestly, most of it is just not very good, and that's why I've never revisited it. There are a few things that I do actually have the intention to return to or finish one day. But in the meantime, there's all this stuff that's just sitting around in my files doing nothing. And so I thought, well, I'll just make that into its own project, because Kindle Vella has a poll feature at the end of each episode where you can poll your readers. And so I thought I'll just put in these little snippets and beginnings of stories and ask people whether I should or should not finish it. So, and then that was on hiatus for a while, and then I found a few more unfinished stories, and I've been putting some of those up. And oh my goodness, revisiting really old work there's nothing more cringy on the face of the earth. Like, it's just, I can hardly stand it. And like I said, there's a few that I actually do like and that I actually think have value and that I would consider going back to one day. But most of this stuff, oh, it's so bad. I just put up a couple pages, really, that I had started of a Western back in the day. And it was just like, I see why I never wanted to finish this. It was just, oh, it was just not good. It was just not good. And granted, a lot of times my first drafts these days are really not good. And so maybe with some editing, some of it would be worthwhile, but some of it just no. And so, yeah, but it's, it's content that I already have. And also there have been a few times where people have kind of surprised me, and the people that answer the polls have said they would actually enjoy seeing more of this story. So you never know. Sometimes a set of fresh eyes on your work can really be valuable. But anyway, in the meantime, reading old work is just painful. The number 4, last time I talked about how I took my 2-year-old to the library and got all their koala books. And we really enjoyed that because I didn't really know that much about koalas, honestly. And so we read all these koala books and learned a lot of stuff. And we learned that baby koalas are only the size of a jelly bean when they're born. And we learned that koalas don't really go down from the trees to drink water, and they just get water from the leaves that they eat, and just lots of interesting fun facts. And so I told my girls, hey, maybe next time we can pick a different animal to learn about, and we can, get books about that from the library. And my 5-year-old asked, she's like, or maybe something else like airplanes. Like, how do airplanes work? I was like, I don't know how airplanes work. Let's get books about airplanes. So she and I went to the library a couple days ago and got a whole bunch of books about airplanes. And we read most of them the other night, and super interesting stuff. Obviously, like, I really honestly knew barely anything about airplanes and just the basic physics of how they work. So I'm learning right alongside with them, which to me is one of the really fun parts of homeschooling and of teaching your kids things, is that you learn a lot, and it's so fun to go through that experience together. So this week it's airplanes, and next time maybe we'll do another animal, or who knows. It's just so fun to have that resource where we can just pick a topic and dive right in. So number 5, I am currently reading the book Burn by Ted Dekker, and it is pretty good so far. So Ted Dekker, I've read many of his books over the years, and almost, I think, more than most authors, he can be very, very hit or miss for me. Like, there's a few of his books that I really love and just find honestly very powerful, very intriguing to read, very exciting, very thought-provoking, really meaningful, all of that. And then a lot of his books are just, to me, in my opinion, weird and like not very well written. Like, several of his books that I've read feel like this really needed a few more rounds of editing. And then some of them too, like, the message just does not shine in the same way that it does in a lot of the others. So and then my husband has a bunch of his books from before we got married, so I've been kind of slowly working my way through them, and hasn't been great so far. But this one has actually been pretty good. I'm about maybe 3/4 of the way through, and it started out not very promising. Like, it was pretty just cheesy, and I couldn't really get grounded in the story. Like, I couldn't really connect with it. But then once it really got going, it really started to pull me in. And then it's just, so it is have, supernatural elements, as a lot of his work does. And it's just reminding me of why I love speculative Christian fiction so much, because there is so much potential there to really explore important, deep spiritual themes in a really thought-provoking way, because you can give it this twist that isn't there in the reality, that kind of gives you a different viewpoint on the subject. And I think he does that pretty well so far. I haven't finished it, but in this book Burn, And so that's been really fun because, also that's what I hope to do with my books. And it's just enjoyable to see that done and to see it done well and to see it done with themes that are really valuable and really important. So, so far, it's pretty good and not too weird or graphic like a lot of his stuff tends to be. There's still some weirdness in there, but anyway, so far so good on that one. So number 6, I was been thinking recently about the speed of my reading because I read very fast. And I've been starting to wonder more in the past few years about whether this is sort of a net positive or negative, because I do get a lot of books read. The past 2 years, I've read 100 books a year. This year, it's a little slower. I've read 8 books this year, I believe, and that's not actually because I'm reading slower. I'm just reading less because I've had so much else to do. But regardless, I'm still reading a lot, but then I also forget a lot, honestly. Like I'll go back, there's been a few books I just totally forgot, but then also it'll be like, I know I read that, but I could not barely tell you anything about it. Like I don't feel like I got anything out of it, and it's that way with many books, and I don't like that. Like I'm like, well, then why did I even read it? So, but there's 2 kind of thoughts I've been having about this lately. One is that I do think it would be valuable to slow down as a reader, and again, not read necessarily, do less of reading, but to read more slowly when I do it. And I was actually given a book recently called How to Read Slower, I believe that's what it's called, and about reading for comprehension. And so I am excited to read that and just see what it has to say. But also, there was an interesting point that was made. Last year, I read How to Read a Book by Mortimer J. Adler and Charles Van Doren. And it was really good. And it talked about just the ways you can get the most out of a book and techniques and methods to really dive very deep into books and to really get everything you can out of them. And one thing they actually talked about is how reading fast can actually be a tool to weed out the books that aren't really worth that deeper scrutiny. And I had never really thought of it that way, but the fact is I do love to reread a good book. And their kind of proposition was, when you're first reading a book, like read fast, skim even, like find out what this book is and how much it's really worth your time, because not every book is going to deserve that level of time. And like they suggest several different iterations of going through the book, like to the point where you're actually like taking notes and really like, rewriting things in your own word, like really, really milking this book. And I don't think there's a lot of books I would want to do that with, although a few do come to mind that I would want to get into that deeply. But there are different stages to books and their worthiness, honestly. And there's something like, when I read just like a thriller or, a mystery story or something like that, I'm honestly not that interested in digging really deeply into it. It's for my enjoyment. There may be, some theme or message in there, but how much the book sticks with me is not as important as sort of going on the journey. So in those cases, it's fine. But then there's books where it is like, I am reading this to get something out of it. Like, Christian living books and theology books and, philosophy and just things like that. And so I have been thinking about that lately. I recently went through The Pursuit of God by A.W. Tozer, and it was very good. But I find that especially with more kind of deeply theological books like that, I tend to have very bad reading comprehension if I read too fast. A few years ago, I read Orthodoxy by G.K. Chesterton, barely remember anything about it. And so that is one I plan to revisit at some point, because one thing I did notice in my quicker read of it is that it definitely is worthwhile and worth revisiting. But I did actually make an effort because I knew The Pursuit of God was going to be something that was worthwhile, and I didn't feel the need to weed it out through quick reading. And so one thing they suggested in How to Read a Book to help you slow down and concentrate a little bit more deeply on your reading is to take something with a flat edge. Like I used a bookmark, and move it down the page as you read so that you're only seeing like kind of one line of text at a time, rather than, and it sort of removes the distraction of the words below it, and it just sort of helps you go line by line in a more focused way. And I did actually find that helped me. It helped me focus a little more, just like intently on what I was reading as I went through that book. And so that might be something to consider. And again, I want to read this How to Read More Slowly book, or whatever it is that I was given. But it was interesting to maybe start thinking of fast reading in that way of like, this is not the end all be all of reading. This is just one way for me